All right, guys. Welcome to lecture number 3. A little housekeeping as we begin. But one of the questions that I got by email from you was, do you do your lectures fresh every time? And the answer to that is yes, 100%. I have never redone a lecture. It's what makes the YouTube page so dynamic in that I'm always replacing and putting something down, deleting it, redoing it, and I do that with my notes. Last week, I sent you 8 sets of notes, and these will last us probably for the next couple of weeks, because here's the outline of what I do. Every single class that we do has to include and should include our methodology, which is how we approach the world. The big fancy term for that is our worldview. That is, how do you view? What's the spectrum? What's the filter through which I view the world and we view the world? The class, being Pauline epistles, Paul didn't confront a world that was monolithic. Monolithic means one will or one view. He faced a world that was unbelievably diverse. I have recently put up a list of 36 false gods listed in the Bible, along with the text and where it came from. So even the Bible, God's inerrant, infallible word, includes these various systems and worldviews. It's important to me, that the student has not only a grasp of who we are, but why we are, and what we do, where we are. So if you have your notes that I sent you, the first thing I want you to look at is the world religions chart. It's a one-pager, and it goes sideways like this, and it says at the top, global apologetics. Simply put, this year, 2022, we're going to cross 8 billion people in the world. 8 billion. Here's a quick introduction to all of them. Everybody's religious. Everybody. As a matter of fact, we are way over needing another religion. If you're going to start a religion and name it after your hometown or name it after your best friend, you gotta answer 4 things. You gotta give them where they're coming from. You got to tell them where they're going. You got to explain to them why they're here. And you have to explain to them how to deal with guilt and how they deal with what we call sin. Every major world religion listed here is an entire class. It would be an entire class of 30 lectures. There are so many things we have to tackle. But in the brief time we have together, say the first 2 weeks of this, Paul's writings, all of them, take place, beginning with Galatians, I believe, but all of them take place in the midst and the context of Christianity, surrounded by everything and anything. Galatians is written to a church that's right in the middle of what we would call the first cult. That was a group called the Judaizers, or the Ebionites. So I believe it very passionately that you take this chart, we start with this, and in a very brief way, I'm going to hit it, and then when we come back next lecture, we'll talk about the cults and how to define that. Specifically, I'll talk to you about why I'm not religious. But if I was going to start a religion, what form would it be? Number one, there are religions that are mythological. They're not based in truth. You don't really even care about belief. Whether it's true or not really doesn't matter. It's an embrace of nothingness, Buddhism, or it's an embrace of feeling. It's being centered. It's meditation. Well, what are you meditating on? Yeah. So that's sort of a mythological system. If you're sharing the gospel with somebody who holds to mythology, you sort of got to pause and go, okay, wait, they don't care about the historical context, or they don't necessarily care if you're proving something true. Okay? It can be philosophical. That is, it's more of an action, an ethic, a politic. If you look in the notes, I actually give you 10 things that every religion has to offer. It's a fact. If it's a true religion, meaning if it's a fully developed system, it's got to have a politic, it's got to have an economy, it's got to have an ethic. How do you rule the people? It's got to have its own science, its own approach to what we see, hear, taste, smell, and touch. It's got to have all those things. So that's sort of a fact. But there are those that are philosophical. There are those that are mythological. Some are historical, being based on a person teaching, whether it can be proven true or not, which is important. But here's the thing. On this global taxonomy chart, literally, every religion fits into one of these 5 categories. For the sake of time, we're just going to deal with 4 of them. But it's important. These are your friends, man. These are your neighbors. These are the people who live next to you, who work with you, who have class with you, who offer questions. As you can probably guess by now, I deal with doubt-based apologetics. That is evidentialism. And so you deal with their questions. You deal with what their skepticism is about. As a matter of fact, it's something I'm working on right now, which is the skepticism of modern man. But if you look at the far left on the chart, it's called indigenous animism or primitive animism, but it's not primitive. Every system that's born out of this, indigenous animism right here, every system that's born out of that didn't have a written tongue. It passed its history down orally. So it's not just a Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Egyptian, which those are the 3 majors, by the way. Egyptian mythology, Greco-Roman, gotcha, but Norse mythology, Scandinavian mythology, they all have sort of a fully orbed approach to explaining thunder and lightning, and they assign gods. Those are actually called henotheistic. It's a henotheistic worldview, which is they have higher gods and then they have lesser gods, i.e. it's the Marvel Universe. But it's also what we would refer to now in our culture as Native Americanism. That is, various tribes, Indian tribes, have a story of where we came from, how we were created, floating on the back of a turtle, or the sea, or the sand, or our ancestors. When they're pre-literate, meaning their story's been passed down orally, you share the gospel with them differently. For many of them, their belief systems are based on their ancestors. So you got to walk carefully. If you're sharing Christ with them, and you're explaining to them that there is no other name under heaven by which man can be saved, you're basically telling them Grandpa's in hell. Tread lightly. This next group, right here, called Near Eastern religions. These, I believe, are the oldest religions. Hinduism, specifically. Near Eastern religions are philosophically based. That is, not necessarily holding to a god. Many of them, like Hinduism, embrace many gods. As a matter of fact, someone has counted, Toynbee referenced millions upon millions of gods in Hinduism. They basically have 3 majors: Shiva, Vishnu, Brahman. The writings of Hinduism aren't really that important because it's an open canon. Anybody can write. Anybody can be a wise man. Anybody can come up with their own new system. So writings, not in a philosophical system. A lot of feeling, a lot of dealing with energy. Amsa, the soul. There's 3 kinds of life, right? You understand this. There's 3 kinds of life in the Bible, 3 kinds of life that God created. God created unconscious life, plants, conscious life, animals, self-conscious life, us. It's one of the things that creation makes us different. God's creation of man, we're self-aware. Animals don't worry about death. They don't stare at a sunset or write music. That's self-consciousness. And it's part of our connection to God, our soulish nature. But not in Hinduism. In Hinduism, all life is life. And that's why you have out of Near Eastern religions veganism, vegetarianism, a belief that all life is sacred and seems to come from its same source. And thus, for them, sin is being out of joint and salvation is being fixed, straightened. And you receive moksha, enlightenment. Before you pish this, out of Hinduism came Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. When we call it Near Eastern, it's basically India. But close to 2 billion people are followers of these systems. Again, they're your neighbors. That's a fourth of humanity. If they're philosophical, Middle Eastern religions, they're in the middle, these guys are theological. That is, they hold to a belief, truth, fact, book, heaven, hell, following law, following rules. And most of them have a God. These systems, like modern Judaism, Islam, Baha'i, Zoroastrianism, all of them hold to basically one God. A little bit of a difference in Zoroastrianism because the belief in Ahura Mazda. At this point, I want to show you something. These are the people you will discuss with, argue with, and they'll argue back. They're my people. And they argue back because they believe in truth statements, factual, evidential, verifiable issues. We argue. We fight. If it makes you nervous, man, it's going to be a problem. Because out of this group, about 2 billion people as well. And they need Christ. And they need truth. The third one, or the final one of this, Near Eastern, Middle Eastern, Far Eastern religions, what we would call Asiatic, Taoism, Confucianism, Falun Gong, Kiao Dai. These systems, based on honor, ancestral worship, virtually every one of them are tribal. Virtually every one of them believe that heaven is found with the spirits of their ancestors, like the kami in Shintoism. That's why they were called kamikaze, spirit fighters, in Japan. The one difference being Confucianism only mentions, in the Analects, Confucius only mentions heaven once. But tradition is sacred. And how do you present the gospel to them any differently? I have just covered, with the exception of the final group, which is cults, Western and New religions, but in a very, very brief way, we've just covered almost 7 billion people. 7 billion people for whom Christ died. When you let me know that you've listened to this lecture, just put down these words: for the world. That's why you're doing what we're doing. Christ didn't just die for you and your family. A ransom for many. All. Talk to you later.